My name is Jhon, and this is Plane Crashed, the channel where we revisit the darkest and most unforgettable moments in aviation history. Today, we travel back to March 27th, 1977, to the quiet island of Tenerife, where the world witnessed the deadliest plane crash ever recorded. Two massive Boeing 747, giants of the sky, collided on a fog-covered runway, turning paradise into chaos within seconds. This was not a crash caused by mechanical failure or weather alone, but by something far more haunting, a chain of human errors that changed aviation forever. The day began like any other for the passengers boarding their flights to paradise. It was supposed to be just another routine journey, a few hours in the air before arriving at Gran Canaria, a sunlit island off the coast of Africa. But fate had a different plan. That morning, a terrorist bomb exploded at Gran Canaria Airport, forcing all inbound flights to divert to a smaller nearby airport, Los Rodeos, on the island of Tenerife. It was a small regional field, unprepared for the sudden flood of heavy jetliners now crowding its narrow taxiways and limited ramps. Among those aircraft were two Boeing 747s, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, both carrying hundreds of unsuspecting souls, unaware that they had just entered the stage of what would become the worst disaster in aviation history. The KLM aircraft, commanded by Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, was one of the airline's most respected pilots. His face was known to many, even appearing in KLM's advertisements. Confident, experienced and meticulous, he represented the very image of professionalism. On the Pan Am jet was Captain Victor Grubbs, a seasoned American pilot with thousands of flying hours to his name. Two crews, two airlines, both with impeccable reputations. Yet on this day, their paths would tragically converge in the fog. As more aircraft landed, Los Rodeos became chaotic. The small terminal was overcrowded, and planes were parked everywhere, leaving only one runway for both takeoffs and taxiing. To make matters worse, a thick, rolling fog began to blanket the airfield, reducing visibility to near zero. Controllers in the tower could barely see the planes in front of them, and pilots could only rely on their instruments and radio communication. The KLM 747 was parked at the far end of the runway, its passengers waiting impatiently as refueling delayed their departure. The Pan Am aircraft sat behind it, waiting for its turn to taxi out. Every minute that passed added tension in the cockpit. The crews wanted to get going, but the fog kept thickening. Finally, KLM received permission to taxi down the runway, make a 180-degree turn, and line up for takeoff. Pan Am was instructed to follow down the same runway and exit via the third taxiway. But confusion was already setting in. The taxiway markings were unclear. The fog was so dense that even the bright lights of the 747s vanished into the mist. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, the crew squinted through the haze, struggling to find the third exit. They missed it, a simple mistake that would prove catastrophic. Meanwhile, at the other end, the KLM crew completed their turn and sat on the runway, engines humming. The captain was growing impatient. His crew had already been delayed for hours, and company duty limits were looming. Every passing minute brought them closer to exceeding their allowed flight hours. He wanted to leave. Then over the radio, the tower issued instructions. KLM 8705. You are cleared to the Papa Beacon. Climb to and maintain flight level 90. The words were clear. They had clearance to their route, but not for takeoff. Yet in the fog and frustration of the moment, the captain misunderstood. Believing he had been cleared for takeoff, he pushed the throttles forward and the massive engines roared to life. The aircraft began its takeoff roll, accelerating down the runway, its landing lights piercing the fog. But on that same stretch of tarmac, unseen ahead, the Pan Am 747 was still taxiing. The Pan Am crew suddenly heard a voice over the radio. We're still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper 1736. They sensed something was wrong. Seconds later, they saw faint lights emerging from the fog, growing brighter, closer, faster. Captain Grubbs shouted, "There he is!" Look at him! Goddamn, that son of a... He's coming! He slammed the throttles forward, trying desperately to turn off the runway, but the massive 747 could not move fast enough. In the KLM cockpit, the first officer suddenly cried out, "Oh God, he's still on the runway!" Captain Van Zanten pulled back hard on the control column, trying to lift off early, but it was too late. The belly of the KLM 747 struck the top of the Pan Am jet with a deafening explosion. The impact ripped both aircraft apart. Jet fuel poured across the tarmac and ignited in an inferno that lit the fog with a horrific orange glow. The KLM aircraft, momentarily airborne, crashed back onto the runway and burst into flames, killing everyone on board. 248 lives lost instantly. On the Pan Am jet, chaos reigned. Passengers screamed, fire and smoke filled the cabin, and debris rained down. Yet amid the horror, a handful of survivors clawed their way out through holes torn in the fuselage. 61 people escaped the burning wreckage, running for their lives across the tarmac as explosions thundered behind them. The rest, 335 souls, perished where they sat. The rescue crews could do little. The fog, the heat, and the burning jet fuel made it impossible to reach the wreckage in time. The scene was apocalyptic: twisted metal, scattered luggage, and the distant sound of sirens echoing through the mist. In the aftermath of the disaster, investigators from Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States arrived on Tenerife to confront a scene of unimaginable destruction. The once quiet runway was now a graveyard of twisted aluminum and scorched debris. The two massive aircraft, symbols of human achievement, were reduced to smoldering wrecks. For days, rescue workers sifted through the charred remains, searching for answers and, heartbreakingly, for the remains of those who had perished. The investigation soon turned to one pressing question: how could two experienced crews, operating the most advanced aircraft of their time, collide on a runway? The answer, investigators would learn, lay not in technology, but in human communication, in the smallest misunderstandings that spiraled into tragedy. The KLM captain's decision to take off without explicit clearance was a critical mistake, but it did not happen in isolation. The air traffic controller's words, though technically correct, were ambiguous. The phrase, "You are cleared to the Papa Beacon," sounded to the KLM crew like a takeoff clearance, especially when followed by the word takeoff, used in the controller's later sentence, meant for Pan Am. In the heavy Dutch accent of the captain and the muffled radio transmissions distorted by interference, crucial words were lost or misheard. The Pan Am crew, hearing KLM's transmission that they were now at takeoff, tried to warn the tower they were still on the runway, but their transmission overlapped with another, rendering it inaudible. In those few seconds of garbled communication, 583 lives were sealed in fate. The tragedy forced the aviation world to confront its own vulnerabilities. How could the most skilled professionals operating in a highly regulated system fall victim to such a basic misunderstanding? The answer, experts realized, was that communication in aviation had become dangerously casual and inconsistent. Pilots and controllers often relied on assumptions, incomplete confirmations, and regional habits. The Tenerife disaster shattered that complacency forever. In the years that followed, global aviation authorities introduced sweeping reforms. Standardized phraseology became mandatory. Every clearance, every instruction, every acknowledgement had to be precise and repeated back in full. The simple word takeoff was banned from use, except when giving actual takeoff clearance, preventing confusion with taxi instructions. English became the official, standardized language of international aviation communication. Cockpit Resource Management, CRM, a revolutionary concept at the time, was born from the ashes of Tenerife. The old hierarchy in cockpits, where captains' decisions were rarely questioned, was dismantled. Now every crew member was trained to speak up, to challenge, and to double-check, regardless of rank. The goal was clear. Never again should deference or silence cost lives. For the families of those who perished, these reforms came too late. Across the world, grief rippled through nations. In the Netherlands, where KLM was a symbol of national pride, the shock was profound. The airline's reputation was shattered overnight, and Captain Van Zanten, once the face of KLM's safety image, became a symbol of tragic irony. In the United States, Pan Am mourned the loss of nearly 400 passengers, many of them tourists who had been bound for a carefree vacation. Survivors later described scenes of unimaginable horror, people trapped in smoke-filled cabins, desperate to escape as the fire consumed everything around them. Some recalled crawling over seats, pushing through broken windows, running barefoot across burning debris. The memories haunted them for life. The human cost of Tenerife cannot be measured in numbers alone. It was a catastrophe that exposed how fragile human communication can be when layered with fatigue, stress, and the pressure of command. Yet from that pain emerged change. The world's airports improved their ground radar systems, ensuring controllers could see every aircraft even in zero visibility. Cockpit layouts evolved to emphasize teamwork, communication, and situational awareness. Tenerife became a case study in every pilot's training manual, a reminder written in smoke and sorrow. Today, nearly 5 decades later, the echoes of that day still resonate. Aviation has never been safer, and that safety was paid for by the lives lost on a fog-covered runway in 1977. As modern pilots taxi their aircraft and hear the familiar phrase, "cleared for takeoff," few may realize that those words, so precise, so deliberate, were born from tragedy. They are the legacy of Tenerife, a legacy built on lessons written in fire. The disaster remains the darkest day in aviation, not just for its scale, but for the haunting simplicity of its cause. A misunderstanding between professionals who never intended harm. And that is what makes it so tragic. It was not mechanical failure. It was not sabotage. It was human. And because it was human, it could happen again if vigilance fades. In the end, Tenerife stands as both a warning and a monument, a testament to the fragility of life, the importance of clarity, and the enduring cost of miscommunication. In the end, the Tenerife disaster is not just a story of aviation's darkest hour. It is a story about the human condition itself. It reminds us that even in the age of machines, it is still people who make the decisions that guide them. On that fog-covered runway, hundreds of lives were lost, not to malice, but to misunderstanding, to pressure, to the subtle frailty of communication between humans doing their best under impossible conditions. From the ashes of that tragedy rose a safer world. New procedures, new training, and a shared vow across the skies that such a catastrophe must never happen again. But for the families, the survivors, and those who remember that day, the echoes of Tenerife will never fade. It remains a haunting symbol of how quickly routine can turn to disaster, and how every word spoken in the cockpit carries the weight of hundreds of lives. This is more than history. It is a warning written in smoke and silence, carried forever by the winds over the Atlantic.